What's the news from the other parts of Tamriel?
I'm here to
Nothing
relieve
I'd like
you.
to talk about.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
I don't
Please,
know
go
you,
ahead.
and I don't care to know you.
The Elder Scrolls, the franchise that in many ways set the standard for open world RPGs of its kind. I've made no secret on here that the Elder Scrolls games are some of my personal favourite, and when I think of RPGs, they immediately come to mind. As great as the older games in the series were, the game that arguably made the series a household name was this game, The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Nordic Warrior here, hope you guys are all doing well. So I've been replaying the Elder Scrolls games recently. As some of you guys already know, at the back end of last year, I decided to replay the original Xbox 360 version of Skyrim, in the lead up to the game's 11th anniversary. Man, I can't believe it's been that long since Skyrim came out, but I digress. I went back to playing both Morrowind and Oblivion. Originally I wasn't planning to make any videos as a result of this, I just wanted to play the games for fun. But shortly after I began playing, I started to develop the urge to make some videos. When it comes to video ideas, I'm somewhat impulsive, so over the course of this year, in between other projects, be sure to stay tuned for some occasional Elder Scrolls related content. Today we're going to be talking about the fourth game in the Elder Scrolls series, and the first to appear on the 7th generation of consoles, The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, released in 2006, developed by Bethesda. So I've spoken a lot on this channel in the past about both Skyrim and Morrowind. I've debated with myself back and forth over the years as to which one I prefer. Initially I favoured Skyrim for obvious reasons. The game came out in 2011 and easily had the best graphics, combat and overall technicalities of the series. Skyrim was also the most accessible game in the series and appealed to both long-time fans of the series, who tended to be old school hardcore RPG fans, and new players who were more into standard action-adventure games. Skyrim for the most part had the best of both worlds, however as I've talked about in the past, Skyrim's RPG elements were a bit dumbed down. And for me in retrospect, the game gave me more of an appreciation for Morrowind, and the RPG elements that it had to offer. Sure, it wasn't the technical masterpiece that Skyrim was, but in regards to RPG elements, Morrowind was by far the better game, but I digress, back to the topic at hand. Oblivion came out in the early days of the 7th generation of consoles, and what makes it so interesting to talk about is the fact that it's a game that I have so many mixed feelings on. On the one hand, the game is huge. The game is actually bigger than both Morrowind and Skyrim, and had such a stunning design. The province of Cyrodiil had so much variety in terms of both its visual aesthetic as well as its overall atmosphere. It's one of them games that you could easily spend hours just traversing the map and seeing what it has to offer, without even bothering to do any of the quests. Very rarely does a game have this appeal to me. It also has a fantastic story, tons of dialogue and characters to interact with. Just so much to do. At the same time though, the game has some pretty major flaws, including both creative decisions and changes that were made from Morrowind, as well as technical and balancing issues that sour the experience. So yeah, like I said, as much as I like the game, I have mixed feelings on it, making it for me the most confusing game of the series. So when comparing Oblivion to other games in the series, I feel as if it's important to sum up the game's overall story. So Oblivion takes place 6 years after the events of Morrowind, and is set in the province of Cyrodiil, the heartland of Tamriel, and the seat of power for the Empire. The game begins with a cutscene narrated by Emperor Uriel Septim, voiced excellently by Patrick Stewart, as he describes a series of dreams he's been having.
For 65 years I've ruled as Tamriel's emperor. But for all these years, I've never been the ruler of my own dreams.
Those of you who played through Morrowind's story will know that Emperor Uriel was mentioned several times, yet never made an appearance. Part of the plot of Morrowind involved Uriel having a dream about the prophesied Nerevarine, who just happened to be the main character of the game, arriving in Morrowind and taking on Dagoth Ur in Red Mountain, fulfilling the Nerevarine prophecies. This happens because Uriel is Dragonborn, and can see things before they happen. In this game, Uriel has visions of an invasion of Tamriel from the hordes of Oblivion, led by the evil Daedra, Mehrunes Dagon. Uriel also foresees the end of his own life and accepts his fate willingly. You then begin the game as a prisoner, which is consistent with Elder Scrolls tradition. You are locked up in the Imperial City's dungeons, and after creating and naming your character, you are immediately taunted by a fellow prisoner, a dark elf who insults you differently based on the race you choose.
My, you're a big one. A Nord, I'd guess, right? So strong. But you can't bend steel, can you, boy? You can't do anything to get out of here. And those big muscles? They're going to waste away. When the end comes, you won't even have the strength to cry for your mother. That's right. You're going to die in here. You hear me, Nord? You're going to die in here.
You are then approached by the Emperor, along with his protectors, the Blades. As soon as the Emperor sees you, he instantly recognizes you, and realizes that your destiny is important to the fate of Tamriel. This leads to you being set free in the sewers, where you're invited to tag along and assist the Blades in protecting the Emperor. One thing leads to another, and sadly the Emperor, who seems like a cool guy, is assassinated by a member of a secret cult known as the Mythic Dawn, worshippers of the evil Daedra, Mehrunes Dagon. Before being assassinated, the Emperor gives you a jewel known as the Amulet of Kings, and insists that you take it to the leader of the Blades, a man named Joffrey. Shortly after, you escape from the sewers, and find yourself in Cyrodiil. Like all the other Elder Scrolls games, at this point in the story, you have the option to pursue the main quest, or just ignore it completely and explore the game at your own pace. Should you take the amulet to Joffrey, he will send you to retrieve the last living member of the Septim bloodline, the Emperor's son Martin Septim, voiced excellently by Sean Bean.
We got in over our heads. People died. My friends died. I've put those days behind me. But the bitter wisdom that one has been a fool is not without value.
You find out that the reason the Mythic Dawn assassinated the Emperor was because in Tamriel, the divine Akatosh had previously made a pact with the Imperials. He gave them the Amulet of Kings and had them light the dragonfires in the Imperial City, which created a barrier between Tamriel and Oblivion. As long as the Septim bloodline lives, with the Emperor dead, the barrier is broken and Oblivion gates start opening up all over Tamriel, with hordes of Daedra coming out and attacking everything in sight. When saving Martin from the ruined city of Kvatch, you return to the Blades and find out that the amulet has been stolen. You then travel to the Blades headquarters, Cloud Ruler Temple, where together you hatch a plan to get back the amulet and relight the dragonfires, restoring the barrier between Tamriel and Oblivion. When you finally track down the amulet, you find out that a high elf mage and founder of the Mythic Dawn, Mankar Cameron, who was believed to be dead, still lives and has used the amulet to create his own realm of Oblivion. You and Martin will have to find a way to open the portal to that realm and retrieve the amulet. When you do, you return to the Imperial City where it appears to be too late. The city comes under attack from the Daedra, including the evil Mehrunes Dagon who enters Tamriel. Just when all hope seems lost, Martin realizes his destiny and uses the Amulet of Kings in the Temple of the One. It's unclear how he does this, and it's kept somewhat ambiguous, but Martin sacrifices himself to summon the avatar of Akatosh, the dragon who appears just in the nick of time and battles Dagon, defeating him and banishing him from Tamriel. With Martin now gone, and the Oblivion crisis over, the protagonist of the game is labelled the Champion of Cyrodiil, and the Third Age of Tamriel ends. So that pretty much sums up the main story of Oblivion. It's an interesting story for sure, and has a relatively bittersweet ending, since Martin is a character that seems very likeable, and he's tremendously well written, as well as well voice acted. When compared to the main plots of the other Elder Scrolls games, I would say it's more interesting and well written than Skyrim's, but doesn't feel quite as epic and badass. Skyrim's main story was a bit of a power fantasy, which I like. It's also not as interesting or as enigmatic as Morrowind, which had an incredibly complex and fascinating story. So in short, while Oblivion's story is better than Skyrim's in some ways, it's not quite as fun, and it's not quite as interesting as Morrowind's. making it the weakest out of the three in my personal opinion, but that's just me. In addition to the main story, you also have several different guilds and factions, each with their own interesting lore, and some of the quests are quite fun. One thing that Oblivion did better than Skyrim in my personal opinion is the factions. If truth be told, as much as I like Skyrim, the factions were a major disappointment. Oblivion on the other hand had some amazing factions, with so much more interesting and unique quests involving them. Take for example the progression system that the game has. The progression system, just like in Morrowind, works in a very specific way. Each of the guilds in Cyrodiil have a ranking system. You join the guilds at a low rank, and progress through the rank by completing quests, and making a name for yourself. Take for example the Fighters Guild, a faction consisting of some of the best warriors and mercenaries from across Cyrodiil, with a guild hall in each major city, dedicated to the training and conditioning of warriors and fighters, to assist the people of Cyrodiil with various issues for a bit of coin. Every single quest you are given with the Fighters Guild is unique and scripted, yet always involves combat or resolving some kind of dispute. As you progress through the ranks of the guild, the quests will get more and more interesting and challenging. There is even a rival faction to contend with at some points in the quest line, which has some interesting lore behind it. Now you compare that with say the Companions of Whiterun, which is the Skyrim equivalent to the Fighters Guild. While the Companions had a huge amount of potential, with an epic backstory and some very interesting lore, it turned out to be a massive disappointment. A lame story, poorly written characters, and several plot holes, with a whole bunch of boring, repetitive, radiant quests, some of which had you beating the crap out of defenseless women for money. The guild are supposed to be a band of honourable Nord warriors, yet they basically amount to being Skyrim's equivalent to the mob, running a protection racket. Oh yeah, very noble and honourable. They also force you to become a werewolf, completely breaking the immersion and limiting roleplay capabilities. And if truth be told, the whole questline involving that faction was one of the most disappointing things about the entire game. Cyrodiil's Fighters Guild on the other hand feels like a genuine, authentic warrior faction. And if you're roleplaying as a morally good character who also happens to be a warrior, then the faction has a lot to offer. All the major guilds in Cyrodiil have this quality, making them so much better and more memorable than the guilds in Skyrim. Even more simple ones such as the Arena are more memorable in some ways. For example, the Arena has you fighting numerous different types of enemies, en route to becoming the Grand Champion. You can even choose to enter the arena as a spectator and watch a fight, something that was very different. Some really excellent and well-made guilds with fantastic quests involved. In addition to the main quest and the guild quests, you also have numerous side quests hidden around the game, each of them being unique. Ask around town for rumours and listen to random NPC conversations, and you may find yourself being directed towards a particular side quest, such as a famous painter disappearing into one of his paintings and you having to go in and save him, or a corrupt guard extorting one of the city's residents for money and you have to expose him, or resolving disputes between rival merchants, stealth-oriented missions, with you having to sneak around and do some detective work. So many different types of side quests, all of them different and all of them interesting in their own way. You may also come across some hilarious NPC conversations in between some of these.
I saw a mud crab a couple of days ago. Ugly little animals. I avoid those things whenever I can. Horrible creatures. Goodbye. Good day. Greetings, son of Skyrim. What?
In addition to this, there are many locations on the map that may also contain a quest of sorts. For example, the Daedric quests, which in this game are more interesting than in Skyrim or Morrowind in my personal opinion. You can do these quests by simply finding the Daedric shrines around the map and making an offering to communicate with them. The Daedric artifacts are also very useful and unique. For example, the skeleton key, which allows you to pick locks without breaking it, like regular lockpicks. This gives you a huge advantage in gameplay. Or the Ring of Khajiit, which greatly increases your stealth, allowing you to sneak around much easier. Each of these artifacts is useful in their own way. Another thing I really like about Oblivion is the quirky style, as well as the abundance of interesting and memorable NPCs. Seriously, there's a reason that over the years, the Oblivion NPCs basically became a meme. It's because in addition to being so awkward and funny, There is just so much quirky dialogue, and you don't see anything like it in other games. Seriously, this game is worth playing for the NPC interactions alone. Now this does come with its problems. The world just seems to stop when you talk to an NPC, whereas in Skyrim, the NPC conversations happened in real time. To be fair, this could mostly be down to the technical limitations at the time, so it's not really a big deal. I mean, is it any worse than Morrowind, which had hardly any voice dialogue, and text that you had to read to know what the NPCs were saying? I guess that depends on your point of view, but the point still stands. Oblivion's NPC dialogue is so funny and memorable, and it has its own unique vibe to it. One aspect of Oblivion that wasn't terrible but I wasn't fond of, at least not as much as I was in Skyrim, is the combat. Skyrim's combat, in my personal opinion, was practically perfect for an RPG. I know that's not a very popular opinion, but personally I wouldn't change a thing about it. Oblivion's combat, on the other hand, was a bit more awkward, and poorly done in my personal opinion. The weapons felt as if they had no punch to them whatsoever, like hitting enemies with a balloon. And using magic, while interesting, was not quite as epic or as fun as it was in Skyrim. Although I do like that they had a separate button for magic, rather than having to assign a spell to a particular hand, which would mean that that particular hand couldn't simultaneously hold a weapon or a shield. So yeah, long story short, the combat of Oblivion, while not terrible, could have been better in my personal opinion. This brings me to one of my main criticisms of Oblivion, the leveling up system. Now Morrowind's leveling up system, in my personal opinion, was practically perfect. And Skyrim's, while more simplistic and less of a class-based leveling up system, it was at least functional. Oblivion's leveling up system, however, is flat out broken. In fact, it's so broken that the game gets to a point where it's practically pointless to even bother leveling up. Just like in Morrowind, you choose a class at the beginning of the game, which will determine your major and minor skills. Leveling up these skills individually will eventually increase your level. This is fine at first, as when leveling up you can put points into your character's attributes, which can give you a big advantage in certain aspects of the game. The problem is that the game is designed so that enemies will level with you. Not just enemy stats, but also their gear. Meaning at high levels, you will run into basic enemies like regular bandits who will be using overpowered weapons and wearing gear such as a full set of ebony armor. This completely breaks the immersion and makes these enemies seem ridiculous, making leveling up feel completely pointless. It's also possible to get weaker when leveling up and less effective if you don't do it in a specific way. Morrowind and Skyrim didn't have this problem. The leveling up system in those games was much better and made so much more sense. Another issue with the game is that when compared to Morrowind and Skyrim, there aren't really many visually unique items or clothing. At least not in the vanilla game. You do have the Daedric artifacts such as Volendrung and Umbra, but these are few and far between. With the Knights of the Nine DLC you do have the Crusader relics, which just happen to be my personal favourite items in the entire game. As you can see, I tend to wear the Crusader armour in the game since in addition to its unique visual aesthetic, it also has some very effective enchantments, such as being left alone by wild animals such as wolves, as well as several other advantages it has to offer. You do also have the Imperial Dragon armour that looks pretty badass too, but these items are few and far between. Another issue I have with Oblivion is, well, Oblivion. See, as the game's main story progresses, these Oblivion gates will open up all over Cyrodiil, and you will have the option to enter into them and fight your way through, to find the Sigil Stone and escape while shutting the gate down. There are certain points in the story where you have to do this. Most of them are optional though, thank God. Oblivion gates are extremely tedious and boring. Once you've done one, you've done them all. And there's basically no point doing any more. There's actually a quest in the game called Allies for Bruma, which I'm sure you're familiar with if you've played the game. This consists of you traversing the map to each of the game's cities, closing Oblivion gates to ensure that city's support later. This quest is optional, but for some reason I always feel compelled to do it, and it's a chore to play. So yeah, as great as the game is, there are some pretty major flaws with it. What I will say though, is that in spite of the game's flaws, it's still a fantastic experience. And there really is no other game like it in terms of its overall style. As far as the additional content the game has to offer, in the form of add-ons, you have the Knights of the Nine, which I mentioned earlier, that adds some more unique items, as well as a few new quests and characters. And perhaps the biggest and most interesting add-on, the Shivering Isles. This adds a whole new map to the game, allowing you to enter into the realm of Sheogorath, the Daedra of Madness, as you traverse his realm, completing new quests, and solving a pretty big mystery. This add-on is absolutely insane, with so much dark humour, and twists and turns the whole way through. Very interesting add-on, it adds so many more hours of gameplay. There's also the infamous horse armour, the less said about that the better. So yeah, long story short, in spite of its flaws, Oblivion is still to this day a certified masterpiece. Thanks for watching guys, I really enjoyed replaying and reviewing Oblivion. Stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews, as well as maybe some topical gaming discussions. I have a lot of content coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.
When the next Elder Scroll is written, you shall be its scribe. The shape of the future, the fate of the Empire. These things now belong to you.